Okay, so let's get into this real quick. Come here. I want to show you something. There's been a ruling from the Social Security Administration that coincides with the Supreme Court details. And basically, the Supreme Court stated that DOGE is going to be greenlit to go ahead and that DOGE is going to be allowed to access a lot of your secret information. And a lot of people are not happy about this, and a lot of people are totally fine about this. With that said, we're going to be going into an article specifically from CNN, and then we're going to actually go through the official opinion and the dissenting opinion from the Supreme Court justices related to this decision about DOGE having access to your secret information. Now, please remember that I am an independent. Many of you are on the left, many of you are on the right. I am not going to go ahead and magically make your tummy feel better by rubbing it politically. That's not my gig here. My gig is to tell you what's going on from a neutral perspective, and then you guys tell me where you're at, what you think, because honestly, I read a lot of the things that you say, and sometimes I get ideas, and sometimes sometimes you guys are like really on with something that's an interesting point that nobody has thought about yet. So one of the things that I want you to do with the chat, with the live comments, stuff like that, is let me know if you see a reason, an idea that makes sense for this particular situation that maybe the Supreme Court justices did not see. Maybe the news outlets didn't understand, because, keep in mind, a lot of people are just like in this frustrated situation of like, you know what I mean? And so, I have to sit back, because you remember, keep in mind, when it comes to these videos, the people on the very far left, they've been very aggressively going after me. And so one of the things that I've had to realize is like, I can't always give you guys this side more on the right side, because I feel like, I've almost been biased going more this way because of what the far left has been doing to me in the comment sections and the phone calls and the angry stuff that I've been getting from people. Like, I'll literally get people just calling and screaming at people at the law firm about, something they don't like. This, I'm sure, will get somebody will call the law firm, I'm sure, and scream basically at one of the employees. It's not a good situation. So I want you all to be smart about it. Think about it, put your lawyer hats on, and think about why this is a good thing, why this is a bad thing, and then use your words to make the arguments. Keep emotion down, because it will clutter your mind when it comes to considering things from an independent middle. Not the left, not the right, an independent middle, where you like some stuff over here, like some stuff over here, independent middle. Let's get into it. CNN. DOGE just got a green light to access your Social Security data. Here's what that means. Gene Sahadi, CNN, 6-minute read. Let's go through the basics of this thing. It was just published. When people think of Social Security, they typically think of a monthly benefit for the roughly 69 million retirees, disabled workers, dependents, and survivors who receive them today. One of the things that they forgot out, from that paragraph is SSI people includes immigrants, okay? Immigrants. So not just retirees, disabled workers, dependents, and survivors, also immigrants as well. But efforts by the Department of Government Efficiency this year to access the Social Security Administration's data systems should conjure up thoughts of data on hundreds of millions of people. Okay, so, but efforts, let me just read that again, because I think I see an issue with this paragraph from CNN. But efforts by the Department of Government Efficiency this year to access the Social Security Administration's data system should conjure up thoughts of data of hundreds of millions of people. That is correct. No, that is accurate, because there's hundreds of millions of people in the United States. It's not just the retired. It's not just the disabled. It's all of them. Why? Question mark. Because the SSA, their multiple data system, contains an extensive trove of personal information on most people living in the United States today, as well as those who have died. Although, so the thing with the whole death thing was that, yes, there were still a lot of people on the rolls, inside their systems that had passed, but were not actually labeled as passed. And the big issue with that whole situation is that they had meetings prior to DOGE, prior to a lot of that. It came up with Martin O'Malley, came up with Commissioner Kijikazi, came up during the Biden presidency. It was decided they would take too many millions of dollars to go ahead and do this hunt and search for people who were basically older, to figure out essentially who was still alive and who wasn't still alive. And that was the main focus here. The main thing was like, hey, we can figure this out, but we don't want to right now because it's too expensive and we don't have enough employees. And then, of course, Trump enters, they fire slash retire 7,000 people. and the SSA is now being completely reshaped. They got rid of all the district or all of the regional offices and made it just basically a north, south, east, west, regional office. So it changed heavily. Now, with that said, what I think is interesting is that they were not capable as a Social Security Administration of going through this data, right, to find out who was alive, who wasn't alive. And what they found, which we're actually going to be doing a video directly after this on an actual Social Security employee supervisor who frauded the SSA out of millions and millions of dollars. And this includes that he would work with outside people out of the SSA to feed them Social Security numbers. And that's how we got a lot of that fraud. Remember how I was saying video after video after video, hey, somehow these non-SSA people must be getting fake Social Security numbers, must be getting real Social Security numbers for them to commit this fraud, for them to be successful with this. They found him. The next video is literally going to be on that guy. They got him. So to be fair with this whole situation, I know CNN's going to give me a left leaning because that's how they work. When we had Commissioner Kijikazi, when we had Commissioner Martin O'Malley, my favorite was Commissioner Martin O'Malley out of all of the commissioners. When we had Biden, right, and his team, they never approached fixing this. It was almost as if they didn't want to touch it because it had too much of a cost, or, and I'm not saying this in that way, but there might have been some value to keeping those people, even though they had passed on the voter, so well, not just voter, but also the Social Security, open books of their computer system. Because you saw the reports that I did. The IRS had people who had clearly passed away that were still reporting income on a yearly basis. That was the major fraud. It wasn't the Social Security monthly benefits that were being paid out. It was that people were putting on those names massive earnings, and then magically the money would go to somebody else. So that's what actually happened there. Eminem21, thank you for the $4.99 donation. I super appreciate that. Let me put a little heart on that. That's very, very cool. Very, very awesome. That's amazing. Thank you, good sir. So the main thing, and guys, let me know if the sound is okay. We're using a much bigger mix board right now than we were before. Before we were using like one of these things, and they're okay. They're not great. You know what I mean? Now I have it into one of those Rodecaster Pro 2s, which I love this thing. The preamps on it are amazing, which is surprising because it's Rode. But the main thing that I want to go through with this is, let's keep reading real quick. All right, so with the lower federal court had blocked DOGE's efforts to access such data, which it argued it needed in order to curtail waste, fraud, and abuse, the Supreme Court lifted that order on Friday, allowing DOGE to access the data for now. Okay, so remember, for now. It's like limited time, yada, yada, yada. Now, I'm curious, do you feel the lower courts were correct in immediately cutting down DOGE's ability to basically audit the Social Security Administration? Because remember, we've never really actually had, that's shadow drinking in the background, we've never actually had a mass audit of the Social Security Administration. Like, it's never actually been done. I mean, maybe in like 30, latter 30s, when they were just setting it up, they were auditing it. But after that, there's never been like a total system audit, like, that where everything was just gone over by some other group in total. That's never happened before. They have different programs internally that audit it, and then they catch people committing fraud outside and also inside the SSA, but they've never had like a full level audit. I'm curious, do you feel that that was a good thing? Let's keep reading. The three liberal justices, Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, and Ketanji, I always pronounce her first name wrong, Brown Jackson, to me it's just Justice Jackson, dissented. In her opinion, Jackson wrote, the government wants to give DOGE unfettered access to this personal, anonymized, I've never even seen that word before, information right now. Anonymized. That's interesting. I'm going to hold on. Let me look up the pronunciation on that. That's interesting. I've never seen that word before. And I've built computer programs, and we've never this happens with law all the time. Like, they'll find a version of a word and use it. Let's see. Hold on. Let me get the pronunciation on. Hold on. I want to hear it. Hold on. Anonymized. All right, there you go. I mean, it's written as it sounds. I've just never seen that actually written that way. All right, so Basically, we got Justice Jackson dissented in her opinion. The government wants to give DOGE unfettered access to this personal, non-anonymized information right now before the courts have time to assess whether DOGE's access is lawful, she added. Okay, so to me, if you're going to do a full audit, you got to have access to all the information. You know what I mean? The way the government usually does it is they'll have some group come in and just audit a particular area. But the problem with that, as we have learned from Andor, is that you have to see the connection between all the different programs, and you have to be able to go ahead and audit between all these different programs, essentially the information that's traveling between them, because sometimes there's fraud happening, but if you don't have both sides of everything, you can't pull it together, which is literally the Star Wars theme of Andor. That's literally the theme. Okay, so bottom line is this. The personal data the Social Security Administration has on most Americans runs from cradle to grave, said Kathleen Rumming, who used to work at the SSA, first as a retirement policy analyst and more recently as a senior advisor in the Office of the Commissioner. DOGE was created unilaterally by President Donald Trump with the goal of modernizing federal technology and software to maximize governmental efficiency and productivity, according to his executive order. Although, remember, it was originally a group created during a different era, but then it was molded by Trump into that. So kind of true, kind of not true there. Evan Reckon Marsh, thank you for the $2 donation. Let's see, Mastermind Alliance Publishing Group in Houston. Give me a little bit of understanding what's going on with that. Give me a little understanding with that. Okay, so basically, DOGE was created, review things. All right, to date, the group has caused chaos and intimidation at a number of federal agencies where it has sought to take control and shut down various types of spending. It is also the subject of various lawsuits questioning its legal right to access wholesale and personal data of Americans on highly restricted government IT systems and to fire groups of federal workers in the manner it has. Yeah, so I don't disagree with that. They hyper-fired a lot of people working for the federal government that were part of the IT divisions. They hyper-retired a lot of those people too. To be fair, the government had a lot of people who did approach work. Not a lot, but they had, you know what I mean? Like every company has their bad apples. They did have people, that had found a way to do the least amount possible. You know what I mean? Watching Netflix while, basically processing whatever, to do the least amount possible to, still keep your job. And, back then, like you could not get fired. Like I never had met anybody that had actually gotten fired except for like one person. And so it was, the joke was you just could not get fired. You know what I mean? It just was what it was. Okay. So basically, let's see. Here's just a partial list of the data the SSA systems likely have about you: your name, social security number, date and place of birth, gender, addresses, marital and parental status, your parents' names, lifetime earnings, bank account information, immigration and work authorization status, health conditions if you apply for disability benefits, and use of Medicare after a certain age, which the SSA may periodically check to ascertain whether you're still alive. Okay, so the main thing that they're missing from this paragraph that CNN should have put in there is that when you do Social Security disability claims, you tend to collect all forms of evidence, okay? If you are unable to pay a utility bill because you're not currently working and they're coming for you for money because, you haven't paid your power in whatever, you're going to use that to show the person is not working, not capable. If the person went to jail and they had to medically treat the person, you're going to grab those medical records and jail records, right? We call them penal records because it's jail/prison, right? So the one thing that, just to be very clear, they should have written into this, but they probably don't know about it, is that when you apply for Social Security disability benefits, especially if you have an attorney working on it, they're going to look at like the different types of evidence that are helpful, that are not helpful, things like that, and then kind of discuss with you what's good, what's bad. And if it's material, it's supposed to go in. Like that's the rule. If the evidence is material, it's got to go in. So the SSA, if you're applying for disability benefits, has a heck of a lot of evidence, right? But, keep in mind at the same time, a lot of the big stuff that people are afraid of is like financial information or, sad that you assume genders. What is going on there? Okay. So, anyways, sad Eminem 21. Oh wait, no, Eminem 21 that's a female. I'm assuming it's a female. I have no idea. I need some direction on that. I have no idea. You got to help me out with that. And keep in mind, I'm also doing the video with the script, so it's kind of, I don't know, Eminem 21 for me. I don't know. So, anyways, just give me a status update on that. So, basically, what we've got here is the SSA can have way more. They can have your entire criminal background. They can have your entire financial background. Because remember, especially when you apply for disability benefits, especially SSI benefits, they're going to be looking at that because it's a poverty-based program. On the 8,000 BK, you click a thing that says, "Hey, you can go get my financial documentation," and then they can click into a computer real quickly and see essentially like how many cars you have, what you have registered, what do you own, etc. Stuff like that. So it's just I just think it's one of those things where like I don't know. I think it's one of those things where at the end of the day, there's a lot more at the SSA than most people realize. Now, keep in mind, they don't have everything for people going way back. Now that they have their computer system with their ERE and the folder system, the ABDEF, right? There's no C folder anymore. Now that they have that, a lot of the stuff that's really old, they're keeping. But for people that were found disabled like 15, 20, 25 years ago, like a lot of that stuff they just did not bring over. It didn't happen. The VA has the same situation where they've been slowly trying to bring it all over, but it's just one of those things where they haven't at this point. You know what I mean? It's just one of those cases where they haven't. So, yeah, again, Eminem 21, if you are a female or an other, you got to let me know. Like, otherwise I'm not going to know. And, pretty much if I'm a male, I'm just going to assume if it's nondescript, for me, I'll probably go to the male, because that's just the era I grew up in. It's not meant to be an offense. So with that said, let's see what we got here. Okay, so with that said, other types of, and we'll go into the next thing here, other types of personal information also may be obtained or matched through the SSA's data sharing agreements with the IRS and the Department of Health and Human Services. Information on your assets and living arrangements also may be gathered if you apply for supplemental security income, which is meant to help those with very limited income. So that's correct. The SSA put in a new program to get auto access to your payroll. Like if you're, on disability benefits and you're working, they're pretty much going to be auto sucking in your payroll data to figure out when they need to cut off your benefits. So, that is true. They're linked now with the IRS. They were less linked during the whole COVID situation, which is how a lot of this fraud was able to was able to actually occur. Department of Health and Human Services, especially with HIPAA stuff, they are linked with a lot of that stuff. So yeah, a lot of like where you live, what you've done in the past, who you've earned money from, how many quarters of coverage you've earned, what were the tasks that you did at some of these jobs. A lot of that stuff is linked. You know what I mean? And so I guess from my perspective, some people really do not like that these government agencies are now going to be linked. But to be fair, like there were millions every single year, sometimes billions that were stolen in fraud just because they weren't linked. So to me, I'm in the direction of, link that shit together so that you can figure out when somebody's stealing something. Because, when they steal something, that's just making it so that you have a worse time, in the future. Now, granted, politicians spend way too much all the time on random shit. Yes, especially with USAID. We saw a lot of that. And I know people will argue with me and get mad at me for saying that because some clinic somewhere in another country isn't going to get funding now. I do get that side of it too. But like America's not doing great. 36 trillion in debt. Like that's not sustainable in the slightest, Chevy, thank you for the $10 donation. I think you do a great job. You state the facts, you're a positive influence, and they are jealous. Thank you, Chevy. Yep, there you go. It's a female icon there. So thank you, madam. Very, very cool. Princess Diana, $2 donation, super royalty. She says, howdy, sorry I'm late. She is super royalty with the club. She's been with us for a really long time. It's just absolutely amazing. So, I see a question here. Outlaw creative food stamps coincide with Social Security. What paperwork does the food stamp office get? I have to dumpster dive when I can just make it. I only get a little over $880 a month. So, Outlaw creative, one of the things you can kind of keep in mind is that a lot of the homeless help or low-income help facilities in your state, county, town, stuff like that, they'll usually go ahead and set you up with additional food. So if you're like really, really hurting on food, you can reach out to those groups because they usually have pantries that they go ahead and release from. And the way it works, the way the whole thing works as a business model is that the companies that are like grocery stores or food producers, like they actually manufacture the food, they get a tax break by taking the food that's basically going to go bad essentially like that day or the next day. And so what they do is they take all that food that's going to potentially go to waste if it's not sold or, basically distributed within that time period, and they give it to the local shelters. And then the local shelters basically, because it's a donation, which is a tax write-off. And so then the shelters distribute that to like the low income or the homeless and stuff like that. So the companies get a tax break, and basically the county, food assistance help programs get food, and it's from brands that you and I buy at like Walmart, Publix, stuff like that. And then basically from there, the needy get the food. You just, it's only good for like essentially, a day or whatever. Although to be fair, a lot of the stuff that was like, it's going to go bad this day, you usually get a couple more days out of it. All right. So let's keep rocking through this. So, I don't think CNN knows all the types of information that the SSA collects, but it's everything. Like when you fight a disability claim, it's everything. Like if you look at like different types of law, like personal injury, like they only collect some stuff. They're just looking for like, okay, where's the video footage that shows when you got hit by the car, fell, whatever. Okay, what's the bank account showing what you used to earn? What are you worth as a human when it comes to damages, stuff like that. Whereas with disability law, you have to prove that person's life has been messed up, that like the whole situation and where they exist, how they exist, etc., has changed to a negative way because they're just not able to do functioning and things like that. So Eminem 21, howdy. 999 donation. How is Shadow and Sweetie? Sweetie is in Florida. She is the life of the party. Everybody loves her. Shadow's with me, and it turns out that a lot of his hip issues are going away with a lot of walking and therapy. So, which is so much better than the surgery, because the surgery was like 3 months of shit where you have to like, for the first 2 to 3 weeks, you got to like baby the hell out of him. He's not allowed to jump. He's not allowed to like stand up on his back 2 legs. He's not allowed to do any of that stuff. So they said he's not a candidate. So I just super dodged the bullet. I mean, I still had to drive to Ohio from Florida, which is why I'm in New Jersey right now. But like, you know what I mean? It just is what it is. It just is what it is. It was really, that's my kid. That's, that's like my firstborn right there. You know what I mean? People are like, well, what? It's a little dog. And I'm like, yeah, but remember, I work all day. Like, and that's another thing too. People have been on me about not going live and doing the live sessions where I answer questions for free on Mondays and Thursdays all the time. I'm falling asleep because I'm getting older. Like I remember I started the firm in my 20s. You know what I mean? Throughout all of my 30s, I was pushing. And now I'm about to turn 40. And I'm tired. You know what I mean? I hit that like 10 o'clock and I'm ready. I want to take a nap. I'm thinking about that pillow. And I don't know if you guys have like gone through pillows to like find the pillow, and I bought like the expensive pillows and then the not so expensive pillow. And I went through all that like pillow research. Let me tell you something about pillows. They make these like little kid pillows or whatever, where basically the pillow is smaller. They're amazing. They're on Amazon. Like if you're like, hey, my head's too much this way, it's too much that way, go get one of those little tiny kid pillows. They're amazing for sleeping. They help you sleep a lot. They help me sleep. That's what I ended up on. Anyways, Eminem 21, thank you for checking in about Shadow and Sweetie. They are my little, they're monsters. They are monsters. If they had true power, it would be terrible because they would eat things and destroy things. Shadow tried to eat a horse today. You know what I mean? He's 35 pounds. The horse is like a little under 2,000. Yeah, no, probably a little bit more than that. Probably more than that. But anyways, point is, yeah. So let's see. We got another one. Rumple Gold, $4.99 donation. Let me put a little heart there. I don't plan to ever try to receive my Social Security or Medicare, Medicaid. Do I have the option to opt out of being forced to receive it? Yeah, you can opt out of it. Absolutely. You can just notify the SSA that you do not wish to go ahead and receive. They even have a form for that. But the bottom line is you don't have to receive it. But even if you don't want the monthly check, please heavily consider the Medicare, which is like you get the most out of, like that's worth way more than your monthly check that you get from the Social Security Administration. The Medicare, if you don't pay to play when you become available to it, they hit you with all these like extra fees and shit down the line. So, when you're going to make that choice, just make sure you opt in if you're going to opt in, or you've really decided not to opt in when you're not going to opt in. Just be aware of like your choice there. That's important. Okay. So with that said, Let's rock through the rest of this thing real quick. Okay, as with the IRS data systems to which DOGE has also sought access, the SSA systems are old, complex, interconnected sometimes, and run on programming language developed decades ago. If you make a change in one system, it could trip up another if you don't know what you're doing, said Romig, who now is Director of Social Security and Disability Policy at the Liberal Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. And just as at the IRS, there are concerns that if DOGE team members get access to the SSA systems and seek to make changes directly on or through an SSA employee, they could cause technical errors or base their decisions on incorrect understandings of this data, which DOGE did. They did that with some of the aged individuals. They did it with some of the coding problems, etc. But to be fair, they kind of hit it too hard, too fast. And I know some of you guys love Elon, and now some of you are like, I don't know if I love Elon because he's making fun of Trump, blah, blah, blah. Elon, with his team of coders, they hit it too hard, too fast. They didn't know enough about vintage coding systems and how much they suck. And so they ran into literally, data where they're like, this is it. And it wasn't it. And, and that's okay. You know what I mean? It's part of the learning process. They were trying to hit it fast because they knew they were going to get sued by Democrats, and Democrats did sue them. And that's why we have the literal Supreme Court opinion right here and the dissenting opinion from Justice Jackson. For example, multi-billionaire CEO Elon Musk, a driving force at DOGE, had incorrectly claimed that the SSA is making payments to millions of dead people. His claim appeared to be based on the so-called Nubident list, which is a limited collection of personal data. Romig said the list includes names, social security numbers, and a person's birth and death dates, but the Nubident list does not reflect the death rate or death dates for 18.9 million people who were born in 1920 or earlier. That's a known problem with the Social Security Inspector General in a 2023 report. Already recommended the agency correct that same report. However, also noted that almost none of the 18.9 million number holders currently receive Social Security Administration payments. Now, they're arguing here that essentially, Elon Musk got it wrong. He did. But what they're not telling you, and it's CNN, left-leaning again, you know how that is that there were a chunk of people from that 18.9 million who were still filing earnings with the IRS. And so that was something where if they're filing earnings with the IRS, and those earnings are coming through as a different type of earnings, such as not traditionally earned earnings, but rather investment earnings, then that actually is Social Security fraud. And the reason why is that if earnings are they're miscategorized, then Social Security FICA taxes never get paid because Social Security FICA taxes get pulled from earned income. They don't get pulled from other types of income. So basically, when you have somebody who's passed away, where somebody else is using their Social Security number to claim income so that they can commit a fraud, and then when they do that, they claim it as a non-earned income, but rather like an investment income, then Social Security FICA taxes never get paid, in which case Social Security fraud actually does occur. But teaching that and sending that through like your TV, through the legacy news, like people are just not going to get that. Because they need to understand the difference between different types of income, what FICA taxes are. There's just too much there. The average person is not going to understand that through CNN or Fox News or whatever. So was there fraud? Was it widespread? Yes. But DOGE, through Elon, they got it wrong for how they were going after it. There was a whole other area where there was a problem. All right. Back to the article real quick. In making any decisions based on mistaken interpretations could create real world problems for individuals. And it did. They had people where they claimed they weren't alive anymore, all kinds of stuff like that. Whoa, Nikki W. did a massive super. That was the first super on the live stream, which is absolutely amazing with the $49.99 donation. That's massively huge. And I really, really super appreciate it because what we've been building out, just so you know, on this end is a studio area where disabled people, doesn't matter what instrument, doesn't matter if they're a singer or they're playing a kazoo or whatever. Although I think kazoos are undervalued. I've seen some shows with kazoos, like artists using kazoo. It's the little kazoo. Yeah, it's incredible. I think it's an undervalued instrument. But But anyways, the point is, we are building out a mini stage with the instrumentation and the microphones and like the preamps and stuff like that to give you guys actual shows of disabled people showcasing talent. That's like real decent gear. And that's important because it's like if you go there with like a low end microphone, a low end preamp, and a low end input, and a low end this and that, then it doesn't do justice to the disabled community. Now, obviously, it is not at the same level as The Voice and stuff like that, but the quality of the gear is getting very close to that as to what they would actually use to produce that show. And so the idea is this is going to be like a big thing in the future that we do. And we're really quite excited about it because I think the disabled community, like you always see them on like The Voice and like, stuff like that. America's Got Talent, where they're like, and what's your limitation? What's your this? What's your that? Because they're always trying to like sell that point. But, they're usually, to be fair, not taking us down a better, more understanding of what the impairment is. And I think that that's kind of limiting because, a lot of people that they'll see like a 30-second, like, this is my story and that's it. I think we could do better than that. I think we could do a lot better than that. I think honestly, we could do way better than that. So I'm just excited about that. That's like bringing music together. So anyways, Ajax Slam Goody with the $20 donation. That's absolutely amazing. Let me put a little heart on there. He said the last 7 mass shootings were either anti-Jew or pro-trans LGBTQ. So-called right insurrection on Gen 6. Not one was charged with insurrection, destruction, violence, and death. Almost always comes from the left. Ajax, like, here's the thing. I work with a lot of disabled people. I know, which groups are most likely to cause potential harm to others. And those are groups who, and it's not actually the traditional tendencies, but they're usually groups who feel like they are mischaracterized and misunderstood by the general public that, go out and try to cause harm. And that doesn't just cover people with anxiety, schizoaffective, schizophrenia, depression, panic attacks, personality disorder. It's somebody who feels as a group misrepresented by people or misunderstood. And there's a lot of people that fall into that. There's a lot of the gay community, although I would say the gay community I felt is more understood now. I think the trans community doesn't have that understanding in, the general public. And as a result, you're seeing like a lot of news about them committing crimes against, non-LGBTQ individuals. And, it's one of those things where, I'll be very straight with you. You know what I mean? Like I have people that, like when I go to Home Depot, sometimes there'll be somebody who like wants to take a picture of me because they know me from YouTube. Or if I'm on like, if I'm basically at the grocery store, someone will be like, I know you. And then, but I do look to see like, okay, is this person going to be harmful towards me or not? You know what I mean? Because I'm an easy target. Like I go to Walmart all the time. You know what I mean? So the point is, I get what you're saying. And you have to also keep in mind something too, which is that from my background and my people, which is like the Jewish people, we tend to be targeted the most, like out of a lot of things that are going on. And, it's one of those things where, it's from my perspective, obviously the Middle East has been very beat up by different groups, including the Jewish, people. Although when I say my people, I mean Ashkenazi Jews, which are basically those Jews that came from Europe. And, we were mostly used as mathematicians, scientists, whatever, you know what I mean? Like those were our fields. And, if you look at the heritage of where I come from, persecuted in Scotland and then made into Europe and then got pushed over to Germany, Ukraine, Austria, and then got pushed out of there to America. We've just always been like persecuted against, you know what I mean? Everybody always had a problem with us, even though we didn't target anybody, you know what I mean? So, it's always just been one of those things where I have to watch out with that stuff, Eminem 21, very cool. The $1.99 donation. Love the little, I think it's like, what is that? Like the Red Sox little hand or whatever. I think that's what they call it. No, maybe not. Maybe it's just a sports hand. That's awesome. And then we also got Diana with the $2 donation. Thank you. Oh, you said another one, which is, you did up here, Walter. I'm so happy about shout out. Great news. That's awesome. Thank you. Very, very cool. I super appreciate it because I just want Shout to be happy and healthy, which is like, because he's like 7-8 years old now. So like he's starting to get into that, like if there's going to be a problem, it's going to pop up area. Okay, so let's go through this a little bit more. Charles Blahhouse, a senior research strategist at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, has been a leading proponent of addressing Social Security's long-term funding shortfall, and he is all for rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. But Blahhouse noted, quote, best estimates of improper payments in Social Security are less than 1% of the program's outlays. I've been concerned that this particular conversation is fueling profound misimpressions about Social Security and the policy challenges surrounding it. Now, to be fair, guys, I don't think 1% or a little bit under 1% is an acceptable amount of fraud and abuse and waste that should be happening with Social Security Administration. Because if you imagine each year, 1%, or like a little bit less than 1% is like what gets improperly spent, what gets, frauded away from the SSA. Like that is a bleep load of money. That is a massive, massive amount of money. Like I get like insurance companies aren't necessarily great numbers with that as well, but that is a massive amount of money to lose every single year. That's massive. They pay out over $1 trillion a year. We're at basically $1.5 trillion now. You know what I mean? Like 1% of $1.5 trillion. Damn, that's a lot of money. You know what I mean? That ain't small. So that's where I come from on that whole thing. Okay, so let's see. SSA's data systems are housed in locked rooms, and permission to view, never mind alter, information on them has always been highly restricted, Roeming said, noting that she was fingerprinted and had to pass a background check before being allowed to view data for her research while at the agency, and it could only be data that had no personally identifiable information. And this is actually true. What they normally do in the government is they'll bring in researchers that will do, basically actuarial analytics, and then they'll turn in the report details as to like what they found, what they learned, etc. And that's like how they would audit things. But again, they've never had a full agency audit, like a full open everything to one particular group. So, DOGE's arrival at the SSA resulted in a number of seasoned employees leaving the agency, including Michelle King, a long-term career service executive who briefly served as acting commissioner from January 20th until February 16th. She resigned after DOGE staffers attempted to access sensitive government records. In her place, SSA employee Lee Dudek was named acting director. Dudek put out a statement on SSA's commitment to agency transparency and protecting benefits and information when he came on. He was the favored, result. So basically, DOGE wanted information from the servers of the SSA. Commissioner King said, I will not allow you access. Trump basically terminated the relationship there, and that's what it actually came out to, And then during this whole thing, Commissioner Dudek was helping, he worked for IT at the SSA, DOGE kind of figure out where things were, who to call, what to get access to, etc. And Michelle King and the other people, basically kind of terminated his access and what he was doing. Well, DOGE, Elon told Trump then made him commissioner because, right, he was helping the whole process of like figuring out where the fraud was, where the waste was. And then he became commissioner during like a rather difficult time at the SSA, All right, so Dudek put out that statement. In it, he noted that DOGE personnel, A, cannot make changes to agency systems, benefit payments, and other information. B, only have read access to data. C, do not have access to data related to a court order, temporary restraining order, current or future. And D, must follow the law. And if they violate the law, they will be referred to the Department of Justice for possible prosecution. Well, that usually goes to OIG first, Office of Inspector General. But that's not a totally true statement. Wait. That's not totally accurate. Hold on. In it, he noted that DOGE personnel cannot make changes to agency systems, benefit payments, or other information. So he's saying that the DOGE personnel couldn't do that. I guess only have read access to data, do not have access to data related to a court or temporary restraining order, current or future, and must follow the law if they violate the law that they will refer to. Yeah, okay. So that is all true for DOGE personnel. Obviously not true for SSA personnel. But again, they're all government employees. People just really don't like DOGE because mostly because of the Elon connection. That's like the big thing. If it was somebody other than Elon, maybe they'd be cool with it. Again, I think it would have been better if, they would have picked some Democrats to put on there. Heaven forbid they choose independents, which is where I'm coming from, but, it is what it is. Now, Supreme Court ruling. This thing came out like June 6th. Today's June 7th. So this is like hot off the presses. This is brand spanking new from the Supreme Court's justices. Let's get into it real quick. Supreme Court of the United States, Social Security Administration. This is number 24A1063. If you want to look it up again, 24A1063. Social Security Administration et al. The American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, an application for stay. Okay, so June 6th, 2025. On January 20th, 2025, the president signed an executive order establishing the Department of Government Efficiency with the goal of modernizing federal technology and software to maximize government efficiency and productivity. Okay, executive order number 14158, 90 Federal Reg 8441. Now, the executive order requires the agency heads to establish DOGE teams within their agencies and to ensure DOGE has full and prompt access to all unclassified agency records, software systems, and IT systems in a manner consistent with applicable law. On April 17th, the district court preliminary enjoined the Social Security Administration from granting DOGE affiliates access to various SSA records, okay, subject to certain exceptions. The en banc Fourth Circuit denied the government's request to stay the preliminary injunction by a vote of 9-6. The government now seeks a stay from this court. So basically, they're deciding whether or not DOGE is actually going to be able to get access to your information, your secrets inside the Social Security Administration. When considering whether to grant a stay, this court looks to 4 factors. So here are the 4 elements they use to decide whether or not they're going to let DOGE staffers see your stuff, okay? 1, whether the stay applicant has made a strong showing that he is likely to succeed on the merits. 2, whether the applicant will be irreparably injured absent a stay. 3, whether issuance of the stay will substantially injure the other party's interest in the proceeding. And 4, where the public interest lies. Okay, so in other words, which party is trying to basically do something? Is this something that they're trying to do really valid and necessary? Does the public want this to occur? Obviously, when you lean into it, you see that Trump got elected, and Trump has been pushing this, for a long time. So the public interest lies, in the idea that they want it audited. They want the federal government to be checked and balanced. You know what I mean? All right, so let's get through this real quick. Let's keep reading through the Supreme Court decision. That way you know what's going on. Okay, after review, we determine that the application of these factors in this case warrants granting the requested stay. We conclude that under the present circumstances, the SSA may proceed to afford members of the SSA DOGE team access to the agency records in question in order for those members to do their work. Okay, so that is the official Supreme Court line where they're saying, okay, DOGE, you're greenlit. Go look into those records. Go basically audit the Social Security Administration. The application for stay presented to the Chief Justice and by him referred to the court is granted. So basically, it's going through. It's going to happen. Okay. The April 17th, April 17th, 2025 preliminary injunction entered by the United States District Court for the District of Maryland is stayed pending the disposition of the appeal in the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit and disposition of a petition for a writ of certiorari. If such a writ is timely sought, should certiorari be denied, this stay shall terminate automatically. In the event certiorari is granted, the stay shall terminate upon the sending down of the judgment of this court. So basically, that's just like, where on the ladder this thing is going to go, what court thereafter is going to go ahead and touch it and fix it. But the Supreme Court is basically saying, hey, you got to let these DOGEs, these DOGE, investigators, auditors, etc., you've got to let them go ahead and, basically access the systems. Let's see. We got Rumple Gold, $9.99 donation. Very cool. Let me put a little heart on that. Let's see. I transitioned into a man in 2006. I have to say the trans community has no excuses for their awful behaviors, man. Their entitlement attitude to tax dollars is despicable. I paid my own transition. I don't want to get into the transition thing with the whole military versus the tax dollar transition and who's going to pay for it when they're being jailed or when they're, I get it. I get that a lot of people expect if somebody's going to transition that they're going to pay for it themselves. Some people view it as like a choice. And then some people are like, this is the actual me that I'm supposed to be, and therefore I should be given these medications or I should be receiving a reduction in the cost of medications. I totally get it. It's just, man, it's a trippy and tricky and spicy topic. It's just tough. It's tough. You know what I mean? So I don't know. And I just honestly, like, at the end of the day, I don't know what to do about it. You know what I mean? With people when it comes to transitioning those medications that they want to take, like, I don't know what to do with it because It's not free and it ain't cheap. So it's like, it's not super expensive, but again, it's not like, should transitioning drugs be provided as a part of Medicaid, Medicare? If you're in the military, should they have to give them to you without cost? I don't know. You guys let me know what you think. I don't know. You know what I mean? I'm undecided because I just think it's really tricky. That's like one of those few things where you're like, well, the person is becoming the person that they believe themselves, know themselves to be. So, you know what I mean? But then again, you could take a totally different look at that and be like, okay, well, let's say this person is getting a surgery to make them taller. That's who they believe themselves to be. Or this person's getting implants to make them more beautiful in the eyes of what they think they would need to be more beautiful, like whatever, plastic surgery, whatever. You know what I mean? Then you get into that whole foray, bud. All right. So real quick, let's keep rocking and rolling through this. Okay. So in other words, Justice Kagan would deny the application. Justice Jackson, remember who's going to be our dissenting person here, with whom Justice Sotomayor joins, dissenting from the grant of application for stay. So in other words, Justice Jackson and Justice Sotomayor are full on dissenting. They ain't down with this. They don't want DOGE to have full access like this. Let's go through exactly what their statements are. Here we go. Today, the court grants emergency relief that allows the Social Security Administration to hand DOGE staffers the highly sensitive data of millions of Americans, which technically they already had because they'd already started using it before. The government wants to give DOGE unfettered access to this personal, non-anonymized information right now before the courts have time to assess whether DOGE's access is lawful. So it asked this court to stay a lower court's decision to place temporary qualified limits on DOGE's data access while litigation challenging DOGE's authority to access the data is pending. So what they're saying is, hey, they want more time to figure out whether or not what they're doing is legal. Okay. But the government fails to substantiate its stay request by showing that it or the public will suffer irreparable harm absent this court's intervention. Now, there needs to be a connection, which I haven't seen yet, and they're still investigating, where they're claiming that Elon, who's now out of it and in a pissy battle with Trump, where basically DOGE is going to use this information to harm people. And I've heard a lot of stuff like, that basically they're going to take all the stuff and send it over to the private industry and make lots of money off of people. It's possible. It's possible. Another one is that, basically they don't want other agencies having access to what the Social Security Administration does. That's going to happen anyways. Government sharing of information that's happening no matter what. It's happening no matter what. There's just too much fraud otherwise. So, the other argument is that, they just don't want people seeing their stuff. It's the federal government operating within the federal government to audit the federal government. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like, it's all the same thing, All right. In essence, the urgency underlying the government's stay application is the mere fact that it cannot be bothered to wait for the litigation process to play out before proceeding as it wishes. This is what I would say. They're dissenting because they're not happy because they're making a decision to go ahead and let DOGE basically look at the data. The problem is this. Nobody would give a shit if it wasn't Elon being he wasn't the leader of DOGE. He was just like a lower but high position. Nobody would care as much if they had a Democrat and a Republican leading this thing. Nobody would have said shit. Nobody would have filed a lawsuit. They just wouldn't have, because they wouldn't have. You know what I mean? They wouldn't have cared. They would have been like, yeah, audit that shit, Republicans and Democrats would have been like, audit that. Find the bad people. Audit it. All right, back to the dissenting opinion from the Supreme Court. That sentiment has traditionally been insufficient to justify the kind of extraordinary intervention the government seeks. But once again, this court dons its emergency responder gear, rushes to the scene, and uses its equitable power to fan the flames rather than extinguish them. Again, it's to extinguish them. It's not to figure out if there's legality here. It's don't let DOGE in. You know what I mean? Because that's like the party mantra there. You know what I mean? I don't know if they chose their words well there. All right. So with that said, let's keep rocking and rolling through this thing. Okay. So explaining that. No. Okay. Once again, respectfully, I dissent. The SSA and the sensitive data it collects are well known to the Americans who entrust their information to that government agency. Social Security numbers, birth dates, addresses, bank account numbers, medical records, all of that and more is in the mix. Every person who has received a social security number appears in the SSA's data and beyond, which is why you need to audit the shit out of it. But again, stay neutral here. And beyond the identification number and retirement benefits that bear the agency's name, the SSA also administers a host of other programs, such as Social Security Disability Insurance benefits, which collects detailed medical histories, describing, for example, prescriptions, mental health treatments, and testing results for sensitive health conditions like HIV from applicants and beneficiaries. Okay. Since 1935, the SSA has been collecting, storing, and perhaps most importantly, protecting the information that Americans provide. Not super well, though, just to be fair. I mean, they've had 270 million social security numbers made it onto the dark web in December of 2023. So not well. Yes, I'll read the sentence again. The SSA since 1935 has been collecting, storing, and perhaps most importantly, protecting the information that Americans provide. Just not well. You know what I mean? Just not super dupe. You know what I mean? Because if they were, their systems would be updated, right? You know what I mean? I'm not trying to be mean here. I'm just saying, you know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Yeah, all right, cool. Some of the most critical safeguards are established in a federal law called the Privacy Act of 1974, which Congress enacted to protect the privacy of individuals identified in information systems maintained by federal agencies. In its findings supporting the Privacy Act, Congress focused on the collection, maintenance, use, and dissemination of personal information by federal agencies, specifically noting that those agencies' practices directly affect individuals' privacy. Congress also recognized the harm to individual privacy that can occur from the government's mishandling of American sensitive information, harm that can relate to employment, insurance, and credit, among other areas of life. To protect against the significant privacy risks that the government's handling of American sensitive information creates, the Privacy Act regulates federal agencies' collection, maintenance, use, and dissemination of such data. As relevance here, the Act prohibits agencies from disclosing covered data except in narrow circumstances, such as where agency employees have a need for the record in the performance of their duties, such as auditing the whole damn thing. And remember, too, like, there's so much data out there. There's actual companies called data brokers. I don't know if you guys saw, but LexisNexis got their hands slapped real hard on that one, where they'll collect information. Hopefully it's legal. Hopefully it's legal information that they're allowed to have. And then they'll sell it to some other group that can make money off of it. So they got in trouble because they bought basically driver's information, how your driving was, from car companies that collect that information and were making money off of you by driving around and them basically collecting that info. And then they sold that info with your name attached to it to the insurance companies, which then used it to basically figure out who, what, when, and where as to who was not a safe driver. So, remember, there's a lot of data brokers out there that are willing to pay some good money to go ahead and sell your stuff, It should come as no surprise, then, that the SSA has long followed a policy of restricting access to the personal records the agency maintains, consistent with the Privacy Act and similar laws. For example, before granting its employees access to the SSA data, the agency strictly enforces background checks, training requirements, and agreements outlining sanctions for misuse of data. It also limits employees' access to sensitive data to only what they need in order to perform their assigned job responsibilities, which is true. One of the weird things that a lot of employees always say to me, and I get calls from SSA employees, they're like, how does this happen? How does da-da-da-da-da? Well, the thing is, they've got a lot of systems in place for, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4 type of employees, although that's not the system they use. They use like a payment system to identify like what their status is, along with this specific agency position. But they're like, I don't understand it. You can't beat the system. You can't cheat the system because, we're restricted. Yes, you, the employees at that level, are restricted, but there are many, 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 many levels of employees above that can edit, change, customize, modify, innovate, whatever they want inside that system. And the next video we're going to do is going to go into a very, very bad, very, very naughty employee who is a supervisor who basically did multi-million dollars worth of fraud. It should come as no surprise then that the SSA has long followed a policy of restricting access to personnel records. The agency maintains consistent with the Privacy Act and similar laws. For example, before granting employees access, they have to sign a bunch of contracts, do all this stuff. It also limits employees' access to sensitive data to only what they need in order to perform their tasks. The SSA establishes practices for handling Americans' data changed dramatically after January of 2025, the day the president issued an executive order creating the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. Executive Order number 14158, 90 Federal Reg 8441, basically said DOGE's stated purpose was to modernize federal technology and software to maximize government efficiency and productivity. Okay, according to the government, the core of DOGE's work involves identifying fraud, waste, and abuse. Okay, DOGE demanded immediate and unfettered access to the SSA's data and systems shortly after its creation. And though it encountered initial obstacles, like they literally got rid of the commissioner of the SSA, like the head of the SSA was removed so that they could get access to it, DOGE soon obtained access to troves of sensitive information stored in the SSA's computer files. Record evidence reflects that DOGE received far broader data access than the SSA customarily affords for fraud, waste, and abuse reviews. Now, I gotta say, when it comes to the Supreme Court justice here, no offense, but like the whole point of a full audit is that they get access to the stuff. Customarily, these groups are not afforded all this stuff for fraud, waste, and abuse. That's because customarily, y'all have been doing a shit job at the Fed government because you haven't been auditing the system. That's the problem here. That's the issue here. You know what I mean? Like that's the issue. Okay. So, just to be very clear, like customarily, they don't get all that stuff. That's the whole problem. Customarily, they should have gotten more stuff. They should have been auditing it more. They should have been finding more fraud. Former acting chief of staff at the SSA recounted that similar investigations typically start with access to high-level anonymized data based on the least amount of data the analyst or auditor would need to know. Only if suspicious entries appear would the reviewer then gain access to more granular, non-anonymized data to just that subset of files. So they got to find fraud first with limited data to then get more data. Again, that is not how you audit. That is not how you audit the system. You audit the system by looking at all the data and finding cross programs, categories, departments, what's going on. So you know what I mean? Like there's a flaw in how they've been auditing this stuff. In February of 2025, respondents, two labor unions, and a grassroots advocacy organization filed a lawsuit in the District of Maryland seeking to block DOGE from breaching the SSA standard protocols. Respondents alleged that by opening the SSA data systems to unfettered access, it was limited, right? They couldn't go in and just change things. So it wasn't unfettered access by DOGE personnel. The SSA and DOGE officials had run afoul of the Privacy Act and the Administrative Procedures Act. Okay. After assessing the relevant legal factors and evidence, the district court entered a preliminary injunction that temporarily placed qualified limitations on DOGE staffers' access to the SSA data. In its order was accompanied by a 145-page opinion laying out the court's legal reasoning and factual findings. The district court found specifically that the respondents were likely to succeed on the merits of their claims that the SSA and DOGE's actions violated the Privacy Act and the APA. It also found that absent temporary injunction relief, respondents' members would suffer irreparable injury from the disclosure of their personal information to DOGE staffers, harm that could not later be remedied with money damages. I can see some of the arguments. I remember reading through it, especially when it comes to celebrities or super wealthy people or stuff like that, where they could feed that stuff to the news if it got out. You know what I mean? I could see that. But a lot of their other arguments, you're seeing, personal records of what somebody has to pay for child support. You have to audit the system, dude. You can't just give them a little bit of data if they might find something about something that looks a little bit odd, then feed them the rest. To me, that's fraud. That's how you fraud a system, by limiting people from actually auditing it properly. To me, to me, the federal government is acting in a reckless manner when it comes to the distribution of the information to be audited. To me, that's reckless. You know what I mean? It's not negligent, it's purposeful. I think it's reckless. The government appealed and requested a stay of the district court's order. The Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, sitting en banc, declined to stay the preliminary injunction, pending its resolution of the merits. The government now seeks a stay from us, which was, essentially the Supreme Court. Just last week, I wrote about the requirements for granting stay applications, and in particular, how this court's emergency docket practices were decoupling from the traditional harm reduction justification for equitable stays. With today's decision, it seems as if the court has truly lost its moorings, which is a cute way of using boat terminology. They love that. They love Navy stuff. They love boat stuff at the Supreme Court, because a lot of the earliest laws that were codified and really built up, it's all Navy stuff. Basically, trade, travel, stuff like that. A lot of that comes from that. So they tend to like to go to those rules, because the earliest rules, they were town-based, little civilization-based, but a lot of the, hey, this is what it is, here's the rules of the road when it comes to the waterways, that they love going to that stuff. It interferes with the lower court's informed and equitable assessment of how the SSA's data is best accessed during the course of this litigation, and it does so without any showing by the government that it will eventually suffer concrete or irreparable harm from having to comply with the district court's order. What the lower courts have done here is carefully craft interim relief tailored to the needs of the moment. To start, the district court received sworn evidence about what DOGE wants to do and considered all the interests at stake. That's where DOGE had to basically send to the court all the different things, that basically they wanted to access and fix from the data that they were requesting. Moreover, and importantly, the district court repeatedly asked the critical question, why does DOGE need immediate, unfettered, and unprecedented access to highly sensitive, non-anonymized data to accomplish its objectives? The government's answers were imprecise, contradictory, and insufficient. And when the court requested further clarification, the government passed, choosing instead to stand on the record in its current form, which was a mistake by the Trump team. They should have given a more detailed answer as to the types of fraud, the types of issues, the types of things that basically, they were seeking to find. They should have outlined all those different things, although they probably thought it would be strategic to leave it very broad so that, the broadness of it would be a more broad audit as opposed to a specific audit for specific types of fraud, specific types of abuse, and specific types of waste. So that might have been a trial tactic. Ultimately, the court found that the government never made clear why the DOGE team requires unbridled access to the personally identifiable information of countless Americans in order to effectuate its responsibilities. Okay. Despite the government's poor showing, the district court still structured its injunction in a minimally burdensome manner from the government standpoint. The injunction allows the SSA, to provide DOGE staffers with access to redacted or anonymized data and SSA records, so long as DOGE staffers, meet the training, background check, and other requirements that generally govern such access. They made them go through the SSA training, the personnel at DOGE. The injunction also permits the SSA to grant DOGE staffers access to discrete, particularized, and non-anonymized data if DOGE gives the agency a written explanation of its specific need for the records. Now, remember, the commissioner, which is Commissioner Dudek, although he's been replaced by Frank Bisignano, the new commissioner, Commissioner Dudek is going to rubber stamp stuff, so that DOGE can do what it wants to do, because he was put in place by Trump. He was supporting DOGE before DOGE was even really anything. So, he's going to rubber stamp it anyways, Although I'm sure there's some where he didn't. But, to me, the rubber stamping is likely high with that particular commissioner. And the injunction expressly leaves intact the SSA's ordinary operations. Thus, in the end, the district court's order amounts to a short-term pause on giving DOGE unfettered, it wasn't unfettered, and uniquely unprotected access to millions of American-sensitive, non-anonymized data, paired with reasonable conditions on data access in the interim. They didn't have unfettered access. Unfettered access is read, write, modify, change data abilities. They didn't have that. They didn't have the ability to go in and recode the programs. They didn't have that. They never had access to the OS to change the operating system parameters of the coding. They never had that. It's not unfettered. Unfettered, the Supreme Court justice got this wrong, is where you are able to go into data with a computer program and modify the structure of how the computer program interacts with that data. That is unfettered, okay? So dissatisfied with even those minor limitations, the government rushed to the Fourth Circuit and sought a stay of the district court's injunction. The court then considered the matter en banc, and its judges too commented on the government's poor performance, which is them saying the lawyers for the government on behalf of Trump's team did not do a good job outlining specifically what they wanted and how they were going to do it. One highlighted the government's inability to provide a convincing explanation of how it will be tangibly and irreparably harmed absent a stay. Okay. Another noted that based on the record, DOGE's work could be accomplished largely with anonymized and redacted data, along with the discrete pieces of non-anonymized data in limited appropriate circumstances, as has long been typical at SSA for the type of technology upgrades and waste, abuse, and fraud detection that DOGE claims to be doing. I disagree. We're in this. Look. Think of it this way. Let's just turn our brains on for a moment, okay, with this one. Let's assume, there's a giant moth. There's a giant moth there. It's now going to fly around and be a total problem. All right, so let's just assume for a moment, right, that let's just assume that if we go by the standard, which is the typical at SSA standard for the release of information, right? If we go by that standard, then we know that standard has gotten us to the point of where we are currently at, because it was the custom of how they did things. We know that the custom of how they did things gave us a shit outcome, because there's fraud, waste, abuse, almost 1%, right, per year. Sometimes less than 1%, but still way too much. As a result of that, now we're coming at this thing saying, look, the old way didn't work. And the government's like, nah, just use the old way. Just use the old way. That's the standard, the gold standard. The gold standard is shit. We have to audit the federal government. We have to go ahead and find a way to balance the books. We cannot, Moody's, look, they just lowered our rating on our credit as a nation. They just said all of you Americans are not as reliable as you used to be with paying your debts as a country. There's that giant moth. Or maybe it's a bird. No, it's a moth. Oh, God. Okay, he's just going to fly around and be mothy. All right, so with that said, let's keep reading through this thing real quick. Okay. The Fourth Circuit's evaluation led it to deny the government's request for a stay because the government did a shit job of establishing its arguments. Still, that court committed to continue addressing this matter en banc as it set a briefing schedule with respect to the government's substantive appeal of the district court's preliminary injunction. Briefing is scheduled to conclude next month, and the arguments presented will be considered and ruled upon by all the active judges of that court. So, basically the Supreme Court saying, well, we had to jump in on this thing. We should have let the other court take their time and figure out the details. Okay. Stepping back to take a bird's eye view of the stay request before us, the government's failure to demonstrate harm should mean that the general equity balance tips decisively against granting a stay. I disagree. The government attorneys, there's that moth again, do not always do a good job outlining, the government information. And so as a result of that, what happens is, there's that moth. What happens is we literally have this entire situation occurring. Hold on. I got to get rid of this moth. Ugh. Okay. So what's happening is this whole lawsuit is occurring because the government could not properly establish. Yeah, when moths attacked, that thing was sizable. I don't know if you guys saw that thing, but that was a big girl moth. So with that said, this whole thing is happening because the government did not do a good job establishing the reason for why they needed access. That's it. Now, let's go back to the dissent. Obviously, Democrat left-leaning justices. Here we go. Stepping back to take a bird's eye view of the stay request before us, the government's failure to demonstrate harm should mean that the general equity balance tips decisively against granting a stay. I disagree with that. I think the government just did a shit job outlining why they should actually be allowed to access the stuff. On the one hand, there's a repository of millions of Americans' legally protected, highly sensitive information that, if improperly handled or disseminated, risks causing significant harm, as Congress has already recognized. So was it irreparable harm when the government gave our information to a face scanning technology company that then got hacked? Right? Because remember, they scan all of our images and our faces and everything online so that they can link it to our account in case they want to find us. You know what I mean? Everything. You put any picture on Facebook, any picture on this or that, it gets scanned. So when they gave our information to this face scanning company and then they got hacked, now that's a good example of where they screwed up. But DOGE's thing is not to criminally capture Americans. It's to audit the government and protect Americans from the government. Of course, people will say, no, it's got Elon, therefore it can't be that, yada, yada. I get it. It should have been led by somebody else. All right. On the other hand, there's the government's desire to ditch the usual protocols for accessing that data before the courts have been determined whether DOGE's access is lawful. In the first bucket, there's also the state of the federal law, which enshrines privacy protections and the president's constitutional obligations to faithfully execute the laws Congress has passed. This makes it not at all clear that it is the public's interest for the SSA to give DOGE staffers unfettered access to all the Americans' non-anonymized data before its entitlements to such access has been established, especially when the SSA's own employees have long been subject to restrictions meant to protect the American people. One more equitable consideration. Through the lower courts, thorough evaluations, the government, it was thorough, but the government didn't put up a proper fight. So, okay, we'll keep moving. Thorough evaluations, the government never deigned to substantiate its purported need for unfettered access, much less demonstrate why it must have that degree of access now. And it produces nothing more on that score with respect to the emergency application this court considers today. The lower courts repeatedly place the government on notice of its harm-related failures, yet the government still offers us next to nothing to satisfy its burden. In my view, granting the government a stay on this plainly deficient showing of harm is also systematically corrosive. We have told everyone that it is critical that an applicant justify its request for any stay from the court by showing that it will be irreparably injured absent a stay. So the idea that the government actually need not satisfy the irreparable harm burdens that other stay applicants have, nor wait for the courts to decide the merits of challenges to its allegedly unlawful conduct, as other litigants must, is not costless. So she's unhappy, just to summarize, that basically the Supreme Court got involved when the circuit court is still trying to figure out what to do with it. Because the government, on behalf of Trump, is not making good arguments as to why DOGE should have access to this information to audit it. To accept this line of argument sends a troubling message that this court will allow departures from our stated legal standards and the basic norms of our judicial system. It says, in essence, that although other stay applicants must point to more than the like, the government can approach the courtroom bar with nothing more than that and obtain relief from this court nonetheless. It is particularly startling to think that the grants of relief in these circumstances might be unintentionally conveying not only the preferential treatment for the government, but also a willingness to undercut both our lower courts colleagues' well-reasoned interim judgments and the well-established constraints of law that they are in the process of enforcing. Okay, so here's the problem with this last paragraph. Okay, when she says she's right, if the Supreme Court jumps in to have the government, relieved of the stay, and the government basically gets DOGE to go ahead and do its thing, and other people seeking, relief from a stay can't get access like that, it does show a burden, or it does show bias that the government's going to get from the government. Because remember, these court systems, the federal courts and the district circuit and Supreme Court, they're supposed to be unbiased. They're supposed to treat the government the same way as all the other litigants, applicants, etc. So it does seem like with this ruling that the government's getting a little bit of preferential favor here. But also, okay, when it comes to the this next part, government, but also a willingness to undercut both our lower court colleagues' well-reasoned interim judgments and the well-established constraints of law that they are in the process of enforcing. I don't think we actually have a proper lower court adjudication. And that's because there was not enough proper legal building on what type of fraud there is, what type of waste there is, etc. I don't think they knew what the job was. I don't think the government did. I think they were trying to blindly go out there and find the stuff and build it in the process. And I think some people will argue, well, they should have learned their job first. Yeah, I don't disagree. It's clear because they didn't legally argue it well at the lower courts that they didn't know what the hell they were doing. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that the lower courts were right for saying that, basically, they couldn't establish a reason why. We're literally, the next video, we're going to cover an employee that was a supervisor, managerial type of individual who handed out your information to non-SSA employees for the purposes of creating fraud. So like the next video is going to just make this justice look a little bad. This dissenting justice is going to look a little shit after the next video we do. All right. The lower courts are hard at work expeditiously assessing whether federal law permits the SSA to give DOGE staffers unfettered access to the American sensitive information. The only question before us today is what should happen to all of that data in the meantime. Two lower courts have said that DOGE staffers should have to comply with temporary safeguards on data access while the litigation is proceeding, which is fair. Meanwhile, here the government has plainly failed to meet the moment, as it has not shown that it will suffer any concrete or irreparable harm unless the court immediately intervenes. But today, the court grants a stay permitting the government, DOGE, to give unfettered data access. It's not unfettered to DOGE, regardless, despite its failure to show any need or any interest in complying with the existing privacy safeguards, and all before we know for sure whether federal law countenances such access. The court is thereby, unfortunately, suggesting that what would be an extraordinary request for everyone else is nothing more than an ordinary day on the docket for this administration. I would proceed without fear or favor to require DOGE and the government to do what all other litigants must do to secure a stay from this court. One, comply with lower court orders constraining their behavior unless and until they establish that irreparable harm will result such that equity requires a different course. The court opts instead to relieve the government of the standard obligations, jettisoning careful judicial decision-making and creating grave privacy risks for millions of Americans in the process. So the assumption is that if they give DOGE information, the information will end up on the dark web. That's what she's saying there. She's saying grave privacy risks for millions of Americans in the process. What she's saying there is it could end up somewhere on the web, right? Could be smaller. Somebody could get information to it and use it illegally against somebody else, yada, yada. But, that's what she's saying. She's saying that DOGE is going to be a leaking ship, with this information. Or they'll use it to somehow commercially go ahead and change the way that we look at this stuff, use this stuff, etc. All right. My opinion, again, it's my opinion, is that we need, whether it's DOGE or some other group or some other agency or department or whatever, to audit the entire federal government. We don't actually have a right to not audit it. Let me explain why. You can sit on your high horse, get on top of that wonderful little juice box or soapbox, whatever you like, and say, I don't have to audit the government. I don't have to. There's no requirement that I have to do that. No, they shouldn't be allowed to. You actually don't really have that right. And here's why. The entire United States is a leaking ship that cannot afford to pay for its military. It also cannot afford to pay for its Social Security recipients, who should have and did pay for their entire rest of their life already, which means that they used and abused the funds and did not properly stock the fridge so you could make it through your entire life with a proper check. So to say that you think that the government should not mass audit itself is damning the rest of Americans to a life of a much lower standard of living. I don't think the Constitution would support that. I think the Constitution would support a true review and overview and overhaul of the entire government. You may recall there are portions of the Constitution that were built in specifically as defense options of the people to basically go and reset the government. The reason why is because when the government gets too big and too powerful, it tends to manipulate the US population, which it does all the time. It has manipulated us into 36 trillion in debt. We don't really have that choice anymore. We're not a nation that's wealthy. We're a nation in massive debt. And I think realistically, and Charlton Zimmerman makes a good point here. He said, well, although there is no technical list, it's cute, but I think you make a good point. He said, DOGE is making a list to deport to Mars. I truly believe that people in the future in this country will very likely have the choice. They can try to make money in the private sector. They can try to join the military, or they go out to space and basically try to find money there. But capitalism and this country are not going away. They're not, because they want to try and entice people to go into space and go into the military to financially be able to survive and succeed. So in my opinion, I think, we have to have a government audit. But the government audit is to try and make this whole thing work better. We hope. We don't know. There might be nefarious things going on. We saw abuse with COVID, including inside and outside of the government. So to be fair, we don't know. But I do believe Charlton Zimmerman is correct that in the future, people will be, living in tubes, going out into space to go ahead and mine materials that we need for Earth. And that this will exist as a way for people to have enough money to come back to Earth and live a better life. With that said, please remember to like. Please remember to subscribe. Hit the like button. Don't be afraid to hit the like button. I will catch you guys in the next video. Give me about 5 to 10 minutes. With that said, the next video is about an actual SSA employee in a managerial position that frauded and handed out people's information, social security numbers, to people outside of the SSA. So big fraud. So, can you trust SSA employees? Some of them you could, but we have multiple employees, and I've done multiple videos on them where they've literally committed fraud inside the system. So with that said, just to be very clear, please please subscribe. We try to keep it neutral. We try to explain everything from both options. Also, I go live usually on Monday and Thursday. Sometimes I fall asleep to answer questions, but tonight we will be doing that. Also, thing I love is if you go to Google, you type in Disability Resolution Law Firm or Disability Resolution Florida. Throw some stars up there. I always love seeing it, waking up and seeing those. Thank you, Flint Girl, for the 5-star review right there. That's absolutely amazing. Very, very cool. I will catch you in the next video. And then also remember, there's a mini contract for a 1-hour private session in the area below, in the bio below. If you need a 1-hour private session where we go over whatever case law problems or issues you're having with your benefits, that's totally fine too. I am Attorney Walter Hnot, the most viewed, subscribed to, clicked on Disability Attorney in America. You don't have to hire me. Just remember, when you do hire a disability attorney, make sure you hire the firm that's actually going to be working for you, not some other group that then gets paid to find you a firm. Just hire the actual firm. All right. I'll catch you a little bit later. We'll go from there. Thank you so much, and rock and roll. Attorney Walter Hnot, thank you so much. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.